Today we're going to look at calculating the expected return of a stock. In this example, we have three different states of the economy. We have a boom, a normal state, and a recessionary state. And each of these states of the economy have a different probability of actually occurring. So there's a 20% chance that the economy will boom. There's a 50% chance that it will be a normal growth in the economy, and a 30% chance of a recession. So our stock here will have different returns based on the state of the economy. So let's say there is a boom, which has a 20% chance probability of happening. Our stock's going to give us a 15% return. Let's say the economy stays normal, which this has a 50% chance of happening. Our stock's going to give us a 7% return. Let's say the economy goes into a recession, which has a 30% chance of happening. Our return for the stock is going to be 1%. Just before I show the proper way on how to do this, I'm going to go over a very common mistake that students sometimes make when given a problem like this. They ignore the probability of each of these returns actually happening. So in other words, they add up the three different returns, so the 15% return, the 7% return, and the 1% return, and divide it by 3. They find the simple average, and when you do that, you get a return, or an expected return, of 7.67%. Now this is not correct in a scenario like this. Why is that? Well, each return has a different probability of happening. There's a 20% chance that we get a 15% return. There's a 50% chance that we get a 7% return, and a 30% chance that we get a 1% return. In this scenario, we have to use a weighted average, not a simple average like below. Most of you have probably used a weighted average before to calculate your grade. For example, this is your finance course. You have a quiz worth 10% of your final grade, a midterm worth 30%, and an exam worth 60%, and you got 90% on the 10% quiz, 80% on the 30% midterm, and 70% on the 60% of your grade exam. So how do we calculate your grade? We take 10% weighting of the quiz and you times it by your quiz grade. We add that to the weight of our midterm, which is 30%. Then we times it by the 80% grade we scored on that midterm. And then we add that to the 60% weighting of our exam, and we can multiply that by our exam grade. And that gives us a final grade of 75%. So as you can see, this is a weighted average example that most of you have probably used, and we're going to use the same method to find the expected return of a stock. So now, using what we know about weighted average, let's find the expected return of our stock. Well, let's call boom state state 1, normal state we're going to call that state 2, and recession state we'll call that state 3. So the expected return of our stock is going to be equal to the probability of a boom state occurring in the economy multiplied by the return we get on our stock in a boom state, plus the probability of a normal economy occurring times the return we get in a normal economy on our stock, plus the probability of a recession occurring in the economy multiplied by our return we get in a recession on our stock. So obviously we have three states of the economy, so this is all we really got to do, but this could obviously go on and on if there were multiple states of the economy. Another thing to note is that the probability, or the weight column, should always add up to 100% or 1. In our case, it obviously does. 0.2 plus 0.5 plus 0.3, or 20% plus 50% plus 30% is 100%, or 1. So now let's sub in the numbers in this chart, and when we do that, we get something that looks like this. So our expected return is now equal to 0.2, or 20%, and this 20% comes from the 20% chance of a boom state occurring, and we're multiplying it by the 50% return that we get in the boom state. And then we're adding it to the 50% chance of a normal economy occurring, and we're multiplying that by the 7% return we get in the normal state. So these two numbers just come from the normal state here. And obviously the first two numbers here, again, come from right here, that circle. And then we add that to the 30% probability of a recession, and we multiply that by our return that we get on our stock in the recessionary state, which is obviously 1%. So obviously this bracket is going to come from here. So now obviously we can just simplify this and do something like this here, and we get 0.03, which is just the 20% times the 15% here, plus 0.035, which is obviously just that simplified, and 0.003, which is just 0.30 times 0.01. And then we can simplify this. 0.03 plus 0.035 plus 0.03 is going to give us an expected return of 6.8%. So this, you might have to watch this back a couple times to really understand it, but do a couple examples and I think you'll find this pretty easy. So now you should know how to calculate the expected return of a stock when you're given a question like this. In the next part of this video, I'm going to show you how to calculate the variance and the standard deviation when you get a question like this. I'm going to use this same example and the same numbers, so it will just be a part 2 basically of this video. So if you're interested in that, just check out the link in the description below.